A viewer asked me a great question under my last video. Why not BMAD? Here's the short answer, up front. It's a different animal. OpenSpec, Spec Kit, and Kiro give you one human-approved spec, call it the fact, and the agent reads it before it codes. BMAD is a whole multi-agent methodology that generates that chain for you. Same goal, a completely different bet. Let's see who it's actually for. Quick recap. In my last video, I compared 3 spec-driven tools, OpenSpec, Spec Kit, and Kiro, on 5 criteria. The one that mattered most was drift. What keeps your code and your spec from silently drifting apart? In the comments, a viewer asked the obvious next question. Why not BMAD? This is the long answer, and I'll judge it on those same 5 criteria. So what is BMAD? It isn't a spec tool. It's a methodology. Where OpenSpec hands you one spec file, BMAD hands you a simulated agile team, analysts, product managers, architects, developers, each a persona that plays its part. It's open source under the MIT license from a company called BMAD Code, LLC, and it's popular, roughly 50,700 stars on GitHub. The version I'm looking at is 6.10. The current version ships 6 named personas: an analyst, a product manager, an architect, a developer, a UX designer, and a technical writer. Notice what's missing. There's no separate Scrum Master and no separate QA agent. Those jobs, sprint planning, retrospectives, test generation, code review, don't get their own persona. They live as workflows inside the implementation phase, invoked when you need them. Those personas move through 4 phases: analysis, planning, solutioning, and implementation. Analysis produces a brief. Planning turns that into a product requirements doc, PRD.MD. Solutioning turns it into an architecture spine. Implementation turns that into story files, then working code, tracked in a sprint status file. Fact to PRD, to architecture, to stories, to code, a chain. Now, a fair objection. This isn't apples to apples. OpenSpec and Spec Kit sit at one layer, the spec file. BMAD sits a layer above them, generating that whole planning chain. So comparing them head to head isn't quite fair. I'm going to do it anyway, honestly, on the same 5 criteria, because if you're choosing how to drive your agents, these are the real alternatives you're weighing. Here are those 5 criteria again, the same ones from last time. Spec format, what the requirement actually looks like. Agent integration, how many coding tools plug in. Drift handling, what happens when code and spec disagree. Lock-in, what it costs to leave. And cost and maturity. 5 rounds, 1 scorecard at the end. Round 1, spec format. With the spec tools, the requirement is one file you write and approve, markdown in your repo, and that's the artifact. With BMAD, the requirement isn't one file. It's that chain of generated documents, a brief, then a PRD, then architecture, then stories. More structure and genuinely more thorough for a big project, but also more moving parts and more generated from generated hops between you and the code. Round 2, agent integration. And here BMAD genuinely wins on breadth. Its installer ships 45 platform targets: Claude Code, Cursor, Codex, GitHub Copilot, Gemini, Kiro, Windsurf, and more. 4 of those, including Codex, sit at the recommended tier. The funny part? BMAD's own docs undersell it. The Getting Started page advertises just 3. Round 3. Drift, the one that matters most. And here's my honest read. With a spec tool, you have one ratified fact, and the agent rereads it before every change. That single source is your anchor. BMAD's chain doesn't have one anchor. Each stage is generated from the stage before it. And when every hop is synthetic data derived from the last synthetic data, small errors can compound down the line, a bit like a game of telephone. That's my thesis, not a proven fact. Now, in fairness, BMAD knows this. It builds a human review gate into each phase. You approve the PRD before architecture, the architecture before stories. That's your chance to re-anchor at every stage. It also ships a workflow called correct course. Say the words, and it walks every document, proposes fixes, and waits for your yes. So the discipline to stop the drift is built in if you use it. But here's the catch, and this is the receipt. Every one of those checks is something you have to trigger by hand. I searched the entire source tree. There are no hooks, no watchers, no continuous integration step that compares your code against the spec on its own. Nothing detects drift for you. And correct course has an open, high-priority bug issue 1930, where it rewrites already finished stories in place, erasing the record of what was actually built. Round 4. Lock-in. What it costs you to leave. Good news. BMAD's artifacts are plain markdown in your repo, readable by any tool, so the lock-in is low. One asterisk, though. The code is MIT licensed, but the name is not. BMAD, BMAD method, and BMAD core are trademarks, spelled out in the license itself, so you can fork the method freely. You just can't call your fork BMAD. Round 5. Cost and maturity. BMAD is completely free. No paid tier, and it's active. Really active. The changelog is over 130 kilobytes, with new releases landing every week or two. That's a healthy sign, but a moving target. And the project is honest about its rough edges. Its own docs mark the old document sharding feature as deprecated. For context, it sits at roughly 50,000 stars against Spec Kit's 120,000 and OpenSpec's 60,000. Here's the whole comparison on one screen. BMAD against the spec-tool approach across all 5 criteria. Pause it if you want to study it. But the shape is clear. BMAD wins on integration breadth and planning depth, ties on lock-in, and pays for that depth with more generation hops, which is exactly where the drift risk lives. So when is BMAD the right call? 3 cases. 1. Greenfield, a brand new project where there's no existing code to fight the generated plan. 2. You're a solo developer who actually wants a team-shaped process. The personas give you structure you'd otherwise skip. 3. Heavy upfront planning genuinely pays off. Complex, multi-part builds where thinking hard before coding saves you later. And when is it the wrong fit? 2 big ones. If you're working in an existing codebase, that top-down generated chain fights the reality already on disk. And if your work is a stream of small, lightweight changes, the 4-phase ceremony is pure overhead. In both cases, a lighter spec tool, OpenSpec or Spec Kit, gets you the anchor without the machinery. Let me zoom out with an opinion. Just my take. I'm skeptical of multi-agent systems in 2 ways. Chains, like this one, pass work down a line, so drift compounds. Committees, where agents vote, tend to average away the bold, creative idea. To be fair, BMAD's personas are a relay, not a committee, so it's the first risk here, not the second. My preference, keep agents parallel and independent, with a human as the anchor who selects. So who should actually adopt BMAD? Extending last video's verdict. If you're starting Greenfield and you want a full planning process baked in, BMAD is a strong pick. But if you're a lean team living in Cursor or Claude code, stay with OpenSpec. If you're standardizing a whole org on Copilot, Spec Kit. And if you're all in on AWS, Keypro. Match the tool to where you actually stand. 2 honest guardrails before the takeaways. First, the drift argument is my thesis, not a measured result. BMAD's gates may well hold the line in practice, and that's testable, not settled. Second, BMAD moves fast. By the time you watch this, the version, the star count, and even that open bug may have changed. So treat the specifics as a snapshot, and the criteria as the durable part. The architect's lens, 3 takeaways. 1. BMAD is a methodology, not a spec tool. It plays a level above OpenSpec and Spec Kit. 2. It wins on agent breadth and planning depth, but trades that for more generation hops, where the drift risk lives. 3. One ratified fact, rechecked before every change, is still the cleanest anchor against drift. The spec tool comparison is linked above. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.